So a big matchup for the Springboks this weekend, taking on the English, and in this video, I'm going to give my starting side as well as the bench for who I would like to see take on this English side. But jumping straight into it, Rassie Erasmus, one thing that man has never been called is predictable. Anytime we think we've got a slight inkling of what that man is going to do, he throws a massive curveball, makes everyone have to reassess. But for the starting side in this match up against England, it does seem like it will be his strongest team that he can put out on the field after a bit of experimentation up against the Scottish. Last week for my front row, number 1, Oxnard, number 2, Bongi Umbanambi, and number 3, Thomas du Toit. I've actually decided to give du Toit another chance here. Up against England, I thought he was extremely solid. Up against Scotland, and yes, they might make the change, put Vincent Koch in the starting lineup, or perhaps Wilco Lowe could be another man that they give the chance to, but I do think Thomas du Toit did enough up against Scotland to earn himself another start here. Oxnard, I mean, what can you say about that man other than he is world class? I hope he gets nominated for Rugby Player of the Year just because he's been so outstanding throughout the last 12-month period for the Springboks. And then Umbanambi to start this match with Malcolm Marx to close it. Doesn't get much better than that. Moving on to the locking duo. Number 4, I have gone Eben Etzebeth. That's really not a surprise. Etzebeth has been at the top of his game for an extremely long time. The most experienced Springbok of all time as well. And he did get himself man of the match up against Scotland in what was, in some regards, an underrated game for what Etzebeth did. He was making important last-ditch tackles. He was stealing the ball at line-out time, getting fired up. And that is when Etzebeth is at his most dangerous. And I don't think this game up against England will be any different. He will be just as fired up, if not more, since he's going head-to-head up against Maro Itoje. Number 5. This is where I've taken a little bit of a risk, but it shouldn't be regarded as one. And that is Franco Mostert. Now, last game up against Scotland, he really did struggle. And it was probably his worst game that we've seen him play in quite a long time. But we've got to remember, he's just come back from injury, and sometimes it can take a week or two for those players to re-find their feet. I think that could be the case for Mostert, and with a little bit more of a set loose forward trio, I think it will actually help Mostert as well. Seeing as last week, we saw a bit of experimentation from Rassie. This week, just moving straight into that loose forward trio, I've gone 6, Sia Khaleesi, 7, Pieter-Steph du Toit, and number 8, Jasper Wiese. 3 men who came off the bench last week, now into my starting side. But for Mostert, I feel like those type of players being out there, Pieter-Steph du Toit, Sia Khaleesi, they will help him settle the nerves a little bit. And that could be exactly what he needs to get back to that next level where he does normally play. Now, there is also a chance in the locking duo that they could look at Arge Snyman for his first ever start alongside Eben Etzebeth, or maybe even someone like a Jean Klein could get himself the start for this matchup. But in the loose forward trio, like I said, Khaleesi, Pieter-Steph du Toit, and Wiese, it's an extremely strong 3. Pieter-Steph du Toit off the bench, he had a little bit of an impact, but nowhere near the kind that we see when that man starts. The more minutes you can give him throughout a match, the better. And surely, like Oxnard, he gets himself nominated for Rugby Player of the Year. But moving on now to the backline. This is where a couple questions do need to be answered, mainly that 9-10 combination. Last week, we saw Jaden Hendrikse and Andre Pollard. Now, Pollard overall, I thought had a pretty solid game, but Hendrikse, sadly, we could not say the same thing. He looked like he was really struggling, dropping the ball far too often. And yes, there was a little bit of counter-attacking pressure coming from Scotland, but in certain cases for Hendrikse, it just didn't look like he was at the same level as the rest of his backline. And I know that sounds extremely critical, and for a lot of people, they had Hendrikse as their starting 9 throughout the next little while, but I just don't see them doing it again here up against the English, unless, of course, they're going to use him as the goal kicker for the man who I've got at number 10, which is Manie Libbok. I have decided that this game stylistically is Manie Libbok's best chance of having a great game, going head-to-head with Marcus Smith, another man who loves to run the ball and try and find those gaps, very similar to Manie Libbok in the way that they both are able to find those gaps in the opposition defences, trying the cross kicks and the cutout passes. Could be an awesome head-to-head to watch throughout this game. But on the inside, at number 9. This is actually where I have gone with Grant Williams. Now, normally I would use him as a part of that 6-2 split, seeing as he can cover multiple positions in the backline. But in this game, I haven't gone with the 6-2. So Grant Williams, he isn't required to be a part of that bench. So instead, I'm giving him the start. He loves playing a fast-paced game. I think he'd have the advantage over Ben Spencer when it comes to the running game. Maybe Spencer would have the advantage when it comes to the box kicking and whatnot. But I do think the Williams-Labok combo could be extremely dangerous. And then worst comes to worst, if it does go south with the goal kicking, you've also got Cheslin Colby in that side to kick. But moving on to the centre pairing, this is where I've switched back to the stock standard world-class duo of Damien Dialendi at number 12 and Jesse Krill at number 13. Now, last week we saw Esterhuizen and Lukhanyoam, neither of them having a massive game up against Scotland, but I believe that the plan for Rassie was going to be very much a split squad like we saw throughout the Rugby Championship, so it would make sense to have two changes in the centre pairing. Moving on to the back three, and this is where I do think we will also see quite a few changes compared to last week, even though Mapimpi had a very strong game out on that left wing. Willie Leroux at fullback, I feel like that was one of his better games we have seen throughout the last 12 months for that man. And then Kanan Moody, extremely solid under the high ball, a bit of an underappreciated part of the Springboks game up against the Scottish. But number 11, I have gone Kurtley Arendse, number 14, Cheslin Colby, and number 15, Apalele Fasi. He was great throughout the Rugby Championship and also very solid under the high ball. I think we'll see England going for quite a few of those up and unders, trying to force Springbok errors. But if Fasi is at the back and he's catching all of those that the English are throwing at him, it could completely take away any sort of momentum that England are trying to establish. Cheslin Colby, I mean, watching that man out on the field is always a pleasure. He is great when it comes to his stepping and getting around pretty much anyone who is in front of him. I really wanted to see him go head-to-head with Duan van der Merwe. Sadly, we didn't get to see it. But either way, when Cheslin Colby's out there on the field, you know there's going to be some magic out there on the wing. But moving on to the bench. Now, you did hear me say earlier on that I haven't gone with the 6-2 split. And instead here, I haven't gone with the 7-1 like they did up against Scotland. I have gone with the 5-3. Now, in the original prediction that we did earlier on in the week with myself and Rugby Itch, I also went with the 5-3, and I think that caught a few people off guard. But the last two times that the Springboks have played England, once for that Rugby World Cup semi-final, and then the time before that in 2022, the Springboks have gone with that 5-3 split. No matter what they are doing in their other games, for some reason up against England, Rassie does really like having that one extra replacement back, so that is exactly what I have gone with for this lineup. So that means number 16, I have got Malcolm Marx, number 17, Gerhard Stennekamp, and number 18, Vincent Koch. The reason that I didn't want to put Vincent Koch into that starting side was I feel like they've got a really good dynamic, those three off the bench. People were talking about the impact that the 7-1 split had when it came to the scrums, but I honestly do think a lot of that impact was down to the chemistry that these three have built up over the last few months, mainly during that Rugby Championship. When those three make their way onto the field, you know that the scrum game is going to completely change, and I don't see it being any different up against England here. Number 19, I have gone with Argas Neyman, and then number 20, Kwagga Smith. Now, some people, after that last game for Kwagga, his 50th test match, got to start in that number 8 jersey after not quite having his best game. Some people are trying to take him completely out of the Springboks side, but we've also got to remember, with the exception of that game up against Scotland, he has been the world's best player when it comes to making your way off a bench and having an impact for a side. So one bad game I don't think should completely take Kwagga out of the running, and the fact that he's versatile and can play all three positions in the loose forward trio, as well as having Mostert with the ability of moving from 5 into that 7 jersey, I think it works perfectly having Kwagga as the lone replacement. Now, we could see maybe a little bit of a switch up and have a youngster like a Cameron Honeycomb or maybe even Elric Lowe as the lone replacement in that loose forward trio, but I do think Kwagga would still be the best option, seeing as he's been there, done that when it comes to playing up against the English. But now the 3 back replacements. Number 21, I have got Kobus Reinach, which does mean I've taken Hendrikse completely out of my side. Number 22, Hondre Pollard, and number 23, Willie Leroux. Now, this is actually pretty similar in terms of the back replacements that we saw for the Rugby World Cup semi-final. They did have Pollard and Leroux both off the bench, and then in that number 21 jersey, it was Faf de Klerk. But that is my 5-3 bench, one that I feel could definitely get the job done when going up against England this weekend. But of course, do let me know who your starting 15 as well as the reserves would be for the Springboks. The game up against Wales, I think, will be a lot harder to predict the side, mainly because we are going to see so many curveballs thrown by Rassie, like I mentioned. And I do think that game up against Wales could be one of the most experimental sides that we have seen in a very long time from Rassie Erasmus. But thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you all for the next one.